My name is Addison Crawford. I'm 28 years old, and during what was supposed to be a normal family dinner, my father Brian looked at me with undisguised contempt and said, "You're useless to this family," while my mother Patricia nodded in agreement with his assessment, completely unaware that I had been quietly funding their entire lifestyle for the past 2 years. What they didn't know was that their useless daughter was the only reason they still had a house, electricity, food, and functioning credit cards, and that within hours of that comment, I would disappear from their lives so completely that by morning, panic would fill their phones as bills started bouncing and reality began arriving. I've spent the last 6 years building a successful freelance graphic design business that specializes in brand identity development for tech startups and established companies undergoing rebranding initiatives. My client roster includes several well-known companies in the Pacific Northwest, and my annual income has grown to approximately $140,000, more than respectable for someone working from home without the overhead costs of office space or employees. The freelance nature of my work has always been a source of confusion and criticism from my family, who equate real work with traditional employment involving commuting to an office, having a boss, and receiving a predictable bi-weekly paycheck. The fact that I work from my home office, set my own schedule, and invoice clients based on project completion rather than hours worked has never fit their understanding of legitimate employment. "When are you going to get a real job?" my mother Patricia would ask at least once a month, her tone suggesting genuine concern about my supposed unemployment, despite the substantial income my freelance work generated. Working from home on a computer isn't the same as having actual career stability. You need to think about your future and get serious about employment. The irony of receiving career advice from someone who had been unemployed for 2 years was not lost on me, but I had learned that pointing out such contradictions only escalated family tensions without changing anyone's perspectives or behavior. My family's financial situation had deteriorated dramatically over the past 2 years, following a series of interconnected crises that had destroyed their previous stability. Brian had owned a small commercial printing business that he had operated for 15 years with moderate success, providing steady income that supported our family comfortably throughout my childhood and early adulthood. But the printing industry had been decimated by the shift to digital media and the decline in demand for traditional print materials. Brian's client base had eroded steadily over 5 years, until the business was generating barely enough revenue to cover its operating costs. He had tried adapting to digital services and expanding into promotional products, but these efforts came too late and with insufficient capital to make them successful. The business had finally closed 2 years ago after Brian exhausted his savings trying to keep it alive. The closure had been emotionally devastating for him. The business had been his identity and source of pride, and losing it felt like personal failure rather than simply being caught in industry-wide transformation that had destroyed thousands of similar businesses. Patricia had been working as an administrative coordinator at a medical practice, earning modest but reliable income that supplemented Brian's business revenue. But 6 months after Brian's business closed, the medical practice where she worked was acquired by a larger healthcare organization that consolidated administrative functions and eliminated her position, along with several others. The timing of Patricia losing her job while Brian was still processing the closure of his business had created a financial crisis that neither of them were emotionally or practically prepared to handle. They had some savings from better years, but those resources were quickly consumed by basic living expenses once both income streams disappeared. My brother Tyler, who was 25, had been living at home since dropping out of college 3 years earlier. He had vague plans about eventually pursuing various careers, but these aspirations never materialized into actual job applications or employment. He spent his days playing video games, hanging out with friends, and occasionally talking about entrepreneurial ideas that never progressed beyond initial concepts. Have you ever watched your family's financial situation deteriorate while knowing you had the capability to help, but also understanding that helping might enable dysfunction rather than encouraging necessary changes? That's exactly the dilemma I faced as I watched my parents struggle with unemployment, and my brother remain completely unmotivated to contribute financially to the household he was living in. The decision to begin supporting my family financially wasn't dramatic or clearly defined. It evolved gradually as I noticed bills going unpaid and heard increasing stress in my parents' conversations about money. I started by paying for groceries when I visited, claiming I wanted to contribute since I was eating meals with them. Then I began covering specific bills that I learned were overdue, framing the assistance as temporary help until they got back on their feet. Within 3 months of Patricia losing her job, I had essentially taken over all major household expenses while maintaining the pretense that my parents were still managing their own finances. The monthly financial support I was providing included mortgage payment, $2,100, utilities, electric, water, gas, internet, $450, car payments for both parents' vehicles, $680, car insurance for 3 vehicles, $320, health insurance premiums, $850, groceries and household supplies, $600, Tyler's credit card bills. Yes, my unemployed brother had credit card debt that someone needed to pay, $400. The total monthly support was approximately $400, representing more than half of my freelance income and requiring me to maintain an aggressive work schedule to ensure I could cover both my own living expenses and my family's complete financial needs. But the arrangement was kept deliberately vague and unacknowledged. I paid bills through online systems using my own bank account, had groceries delivered to their house through services where I was the account holder, and structured the financial support to appear as though it was coming from multiple sources rather than entirely from me. My parents never asked directly where the money was coming from to pay their bills, and I never explicitly stated that I was covering all their expenses. This mutual avoidance of honest discussion about our financial arrangement allowed everyone to maintain comfortable fictions. My parents could pretend they were still managing their household finances, and I could avoid confronting them with the reality that they were completely dependent on their useless daughter's income. The criticism of my career choices continued and actually intensified as my financial support of the family increased. Patricia would make comments about how freelance work was unstable and risky while sitting in a house whose mortgage I was paying. Brian would suggest that I needed to get serious about career planning while driving a car whose payment I was covering. Tyler would mock my computer job while I paid off the credit card debt he accumulated buying video games and dining out with friends. The disconnect between the criticism I received and the financial reality of our family situation was staggering. But I convinced myself that my parents' judgment was impaired by the stress and shame of their own unemployment, and that once they recovered financially, they would recognize and appreciate the support I had provided. But as months turned into a year and then into 2 years, it became increasingly clear that my parents had no intention of returning to employment and had become comfortable with the lifestyle my income was funding. Patricia occasionally mentioned applying for jobs, but these applications were half-hearted and inevitably resulted in complaints that available positions were beneath her experience level or didn't offer adequate compensation. Brian had given up entirely on traditional employment and instead spent his days pursuing hobbies and complaining about how modern business practices had destroyed opportunities for hardworking entrepreneurs like himself. He seemed to view his unemployment as forced retirement, rather than as a temporary situation requiring active job searching and financial adjustment. Tyler showed no signs of planning to move out or contribute financially to the household, apparently assuming that living at home without employment was a sustainable long-term arrangement that required no justification or explanation. The breaking point came during a dinner conversation about my work schedule. I had been working particularly long hours that week to complete a major rebranding project for a tech startup client, and I had mentioned being tired from the extended work sessions required to meet the project deadline. If you're so tired from your computer work, maybe you should get a real job with normal hours, Tyler said dismissively, not looking up from his phone where he was scrolling through social media. Sitting at a computer all day isn't that hard. You're just not used to actual work. The comment from my unemployed brother who spent his days gaming and socializing would have been merely irritating if it had been an isolated incident, but it triggered Brian's lecture about career stability and the problems with freelance work. Tyler has a point, Brian said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when delivering what he considered important life lessons. You've been doing this freelance thing for years now. And what do you have to show for it? No benefits, no retirement plan, no career advancement. You're just treading water while other people your age are building real careers with real security. The assessment of my career as treading water, while I was earning $140,000 annually and supporting 4 adults financially, was so disconnected from reality that I initially couldn't formulate a response. I sat there staring at my father, trying to process how someone who was living entirely off my income could characterize my work as inadequate or unsuccessful. Addison needs to think seriously about her future, Patricia added, nodding in agreement with Brian's assessment. Freelance work might seem fun and flexible now, but what happens when you're older and need stability? You can't just play around with creative projects forever and expect to build a real life. The characterization of my professional design work for major corporate clients as playing around with creative projects revealed how little my parents understood or respected what I did for a living. But what was more painful was the realization that they genuinely believed I was the family's disappointment, the child who had failed to achieve real success, despite the fact that I was the only one generating any income at all. "You know what your problem is?" Brian said, his voice becoming harsher as he warmed to his topic. "You think you're too good for regular employment. You think working from home makes you some kind of independent entrepreneur. But really, you're just avoiding the discipline and structure of real work. You're useless to this family because you've never learned what it means to contribute consistently and reliably." The accusation that I was useless to this family hit me like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because it revealed such profound delusion about our actual family dynamics. I was the one providing consistent and reliable contribution. I was literally paying for everything they needed to survive. But they had convinced themselves that I was the burden rather than the provider. Patricia nodded in agreement with Brian's assessment, her expression showing that she genuinely believed her husband's characterization of me as useless was accurate and justified. Tyler smirked, clearly enjoying seeing me criticized by our parents and feeling validated in his own dismissive attitude toward my work. Have you ever had a moment of absolute clarity where you understood that people would never see you accurately regardless of how much evidence contradicted their beliefs? That's exactly what I experienced as I sat at that dinner table, watching my family agree that I was useless while sitting in a house I was paying for, eating food I had purchased, with electricity I was funding flowing through the walls. I didn't argue with their assessment. I didn't defend my career or point out the financial reality of who was supporting whom. I didn't try to make them understand how wrong they were or how ungrateful their criticism sounded given their complete dependence on my income. Instead, I simply smiled, stood up from the table, took my coat from the rack by the door, and walked out of the house without saying another word. The silence of my departure was more powerful than any argument could have been. And as I drove away from my family's house toward my own apartment, I made decisions that would fundamentally alter all of our lives within hours. The first thing I did after arriving home was open my laptop and systematically cancel every automatic payment I had set up for my family's expenses. The mortgage payment that was scheduled to process in 3 days, canceled. The utility payments that were set to automatically withdraw at the beginning of each month, canceled. The car payment transfers that kept both of my parents' vehicles from being repossessed, canceled. The insurance premiums that maintained their health coverage and vehicle policies, canceled. I removed my payment information from the grocery delivery service that had been providing all their food, canceled the streaming services I had been paying for that they used daily, and terminated the internet service plan that was in my name but installed at their house. The systematic dismantling of financial support that had been sustaining 4 adults took less than 30 minutes. Every automatic payment, every service subscription, every financial arrangement that connected me to their household expenses was methodically terminated while I sat at my desk in the quiet of my apartment, watching the cancellation confirmations arrive in my email. Then I blocked their phone numbers. All of them, Patricia, Brian, Tyler. I blocked their email addresses, their social media accounts, and any other digital channels through which they might attempt to contact me once they discovered what I had done. I didn't leave a note explaining my actions or send a message announcing my withdrawal of support. People who call you useless don't deserve explanations or justifications. They deserve to experience life without your supposedly useless contributions so they can discover what actual uselessness looks like. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel for 3 days, wanting to be completely unavailable when the first bills started arriving unpaid and the first services began disconnecting. I needed physical and psychological distance from my family, while the consequences of their delusion about my value began manifesting in their daily lives. The hotel room was quiet and peaceful, offering a sense of relief that I hadn't fully realized I needed until I experienced it. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't carrying the stress of supporting 4 adults financially while receiving only criticism and dismissal in return. I wasn't worried about making enough money to cover everyone's expenses. I wasn't managing the complex logistics of paying bills for a household that wasn't even my own. I was just Addison, successful freelance designer, sitting in a comfortable hotel room with my laptop, working on client projects that people actually valued and appreciated. The absence of family stress was immediately transformative, revealing how much psychological burden I had been carrying while trying to maintain the fiction that my support was somehow inadequate or unimportant. During those 3 days in the hotel, I also made practical decisions about my future financial arrangement with my family, which is to say, I decided there would be no future financial arrangement. The money I had been spending to support people who considered me useless would now be invested in my own life, my own goals, my own future security. I calculated that over 2 years I had transferred approximately $130,000 to support my family's expenses. That was $130,000 I could have used to buy investment property, maximize retirement contributions, take international trips, or simply build substantial savings that would provide long-term financial security. Instead, that money had gone to people who repaid financial rescue with criticism, who lived off my income while mocking my career, who accepted my support while calling me useless to my face. The recognition that I had been enabling their dysfunction while damaging my own financial future was painful, but clarifying. Have you ever realized that helping someone wasn't actually helping them, but was instead enabling them to avoid growth, accountability, and necessary change? That's exactly what I understood as I sat in that hotel room, seeing clearly that my financial support had allowed my parents to avoid returning to work and had enabled Tyler to remain in perpetual adolescence without consequences. The first indication that my family had discovered the financial consequences of my departure came at 7:01 a.m. on the 3rd day after I left, when my blocked call log showed the first of what would become 48 missed calls from Patricia within 6 hours. The calls started arriving in clusters, 3 or 4 attempts within minutes of each other, then a pause of 10 or 15 minutes, then another cluster of desperate attempts to reach me. I had disabled voicemail for blocked numbers, so I couldn't hear what Patricia was saying in her messages, but the sheer volume and timing of the calls told me everything I needed to know. The first utility disconnection notices had arrived, or a credit card payment had bounced, or some service had been terminated, and they were beginning to understand that something had changed with their mysteriously reliable bill payments. Brian's contact attempts were fewer but came with text messages that somehow bypassed my blocking. He had apparently created a new phone number specifically to reach me. The first message was simply, "Come home." 3 words that attempted to command my return without acknowledging why I had left or what they had said to drive me away. The second message came 2 hours later. "We need to talk about the bills. Something is wrong with the automatic payments. Please call us immediately." The framing of my deliberate cancellation of support as something wrong with automatic payments revealed that they still hadn't grasped that I had intentionally withdrawn all financial assistance. Tyler's messages were characteristically self-centered. "My credit card got declined and they said the payment bounced. Did you forget to pay it this month? You need to fix this ASAP because I have plans this weekend." The assumption that I would fix the situation and the characterization of paying his credit card as something I had forgotten rather than deliberately stopped showed that he had no awareness of why his financial support had ended. I didn't respond to any of the messages or acknowledge the missed calls. People who call you useless and then panic when bills stop being paid don't deserve immediate explanations. They deserve to sit with the consequences of their words and discover through experience what they actually think about your value. By day 4, The financial consequences were accelerating and my family's panic was intensifying. The mortgage payment had officially failed to process, triggering a late fee and a notice from the bank about missed payment. The electric company had sent a disconnection warning for unpaid bills. Both car payments had bounced, putting the vehicles at risk of repossession. The health insurance had been canceled for non-payment. Patricia's missed calls had reached 48 attempts, and Brian had sent 6 more messages that showed growing awareness that something fundamental had changed. Addison, I don't know what's happening, but all our bills are coming back unpaid. The mortgage company called about the missed payment. Please call us so we can figure out what's going on. The request that I help them figure out what's going on, as though my withdrawal of support was some mysterious technical problem rather than a deliberate response to being called useless, revealed the depth of their denial about our actual family dynamics. By day 5, someone in my family had apparently done enough investigation to discover that I had been paying all their bills and that the cessation of those payments was not accidental, but intentional. The message from Brian that arrived that morning showed this realization. We know you canceled all the bill payments. We need to talk about why you did this and how we can resolve it. This is not something you do to family. Please call us immediately. The characterization of withdrawing financial support as something you don't do to family, while making no mention of the assault on my value that had precipitated my departure, showed that my parents still couldn't see their own behavior clearly. They could recognize that I had stopped funding their lifestyle, but they couldn't connect that action to calling me useless while I was supporting them. On day 6, I received a message from my Aunt Linda, who had apparently been enlisted to help persuade me to restore my family's financial support. Addison, your mother called me very upset about some bills not being paid. She says you've been helping them financially and that you stopped suddenly without explanation. I don't know what happened between you all, but surely you can work this out as a family. Please call your parents so you can resolve this situation. The characterization of my financial support as helping, rather than completely sustaining them, and the suggestion that I had stopped suddenly without explanation, rather than in direct response to being called useless, showed that my parents were controlling the narrative about what had happened. But I had no interest in arguing about narratives or explaining my decisions to extended family who didn't know the full context. I sent one brief message to my aunt. I was told I'm useless to my family. I'm simply demonstrating what they said was true by being useless somewhere else. Then I blocked her number as well, preventing any further attempts at family mediation. On day 7, I finally sent my only response to my family's dozens of messages and missed calls. I composed a single text message that I sent to the group chat that included Patricia, Brian, and Tyler. Useless is busy. 2 words that echoed their assessment of me while making clear that my absence from their lives was deliberate and my refusal to engage with their panic was intentional. I wasn't disappearing because I was hurt or needed time to process. I was removing my useless presence from people who had made clear they didn't value my contributions. The response to my text was immediate and intense. Within minutes, all 3 family members were texting paragraphs of explanation, justification, and increasingly desperate appeals for me to resume supporting them financially. Addison, when we said you were useless, we didn't mean it the way you apparently took it, Patricia texted. We were just concerned about your career stability and trying to encourage you to think about your future. We didn't mean you weren't valuable to the family. Please come home so we can talk about this rationally. The reframing of calling me useless as concern about career stability was such transparent revisionist history that I almost laughed, but I didn't respond, allowing my silence to speak more powerfully than any argument could. This is ridiculous, Tyler texted. You can't just abandon your family because someone said something you didn't like. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. You're being way too sensitive about this. The characterization of being called useless by your entire family as something you didn't like revealed that Tyler had learned nothing from the past week and still didn't grasp why I had left or what the consequences of that departure would be. Brian's message was longer and attempted to be more conciliatory. Addison, I apologize if what I said about you being useless hurt your feelings. That wasn't my intention. I was frustrated about other things, and I took it out on you unfairly. Please, let's sit down and talk about this as adults. Your mother and I need you right now, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive a thoughtless comment and help your family through this difficult time." The apology for hurting my feelings, rather than for the fundamental disrespect of calling someone useless while living off their income, showed that Brian still didn't understand what he had actually done wrong. He thought this was about an emotional reaction I was having, rather than a rational response to accurate assessment of how little they valued me. I didn't respond to any of these messages. Instead, I continued with my plan to build a life completely separate from the family that had taken my support for granted while treating me with dismissive contempt. 3 weeks after my departure, I had established a new normal that felt healthier and more sustainable than anything I had experienced while supporting my family. The $5,400 per month I had been spending on their expenses was now available for my own life, and I was using it to make investments and improvements that had been impossible while funding for adults. I rented a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had always wanted to live in but couldn't afford while supporting my family. The second bedroom became a professional office space with high-end equipment and a setup that would allow me to work more efficiently and take on more prestigious clients. I increased my retirement contributions significantly, making up for 2 years of minimal retirement savings, while my income had been diverted to family support. I scheduled the international travel I had been postponing, a 2-week design conference in Barcelona that would combine professional development with the kind of cultural experience I had been dreaming about for years. Most importantly, I was working with clients who valued my expertise and treated me with professional respect. The contrast between being called useless by my family and being sought after by successful companies who paid premium rates for my design services was stark and validating. "Addison, your brand identity work for us has been transformative," one client told me during a project review meeting. "You have an ability to understand the essence of what we're trying to communicate and translate that into visual language that resonates with our target audience. We've already seen significant improvement in our market positioning since implementing your designs. Have you ever realized that the people who valued you least were the ones who knew you most personally, while strangers who only knew your professional work valued you tremendously? That's exactly what I experienced as I built a life where my contributions were recognized and appreciated rather than dismissed and mocked." But my family's attempts to contact me and restore the financial support they had lost continued unabated, growing more desperate as the reality of their situation became undeniable. 2 months after my departure, I received a registered letter at my new apartment from Patricia. The fact that she had tracked down my new address, probably through my Aunt Linda or some other family connection, showed determination. But the content of the letter revealed that she still didn't fully grasp why I had left or what would be required for any kind of reconciliation. "Dear Addison," the letter began, "it's been 2 months since you left our family, and we're all suffering from your absence. Your father and I are facing foreclosure on the house because we can't make the mortgage payments without your help. We've tried to get employment, but the job market is difficult, and we're not having success finding positions that match our experience and qualifications." The characterization of their failure to find work as being about difficult job market, rather than their unwillingness to accept available positions, revealed that they hadn't changed their fundamental attitudes about employment and financial responsibility. "We understand that you were hurt by your father's comment about being useless," the letter continued, "but surely you can see that we didn't mean it literally. We were just expressing frustration about your career choices in a way that came out more harshly than we intended. Family members say things they don't mean sometimes, and part of being an adult is learning to forgive those moments and move forward together." The continued framing of calling me useless as a momentary expression of frustration, rather than as a revealing statement about their fundamental lack of respect for me, showed that Patricia had learned nothing from the consequences of that comment. "Tyler has been trying to find work as well," she wrote, "but it's difficult for young people to get started in today's economy. He could use your guidance and maybe some connections in the professional world. As his older sister, you have a responsibility to help him build his career rather than abandoning him when he needs family support." The suggestion that I had responsibility to help my 25-year-old unemployed brother build a career while he had been mocking my work and living off my financial support revealed how deeply entrenched my family's sense of entitlement to my resources remained. "We need you, Addison," the letter concluded. "Your family needs you. Please come home so we can work through our differences and restore our family unity. We're willing to apologize for anything that hurt you if you're willing to forgive us and help us through this difficult time." The letter sat on my desk for 3 days while I considered whether to respond. Eventually, I decided that one final communication was necessary to establish permanent boundaries and make absolutely clear that my departure had not been an emotional reaction that would fade with time, but a calculated decision based on accurate assessment of our relationship dynamics. I composed a brief email that I sent to Patricia, Brian, and Tyler simultaneously. "You called me useless while I was paying your mortgage, utilities, car payments, insurance, groceries, and credit card bills. You mocked my career while living entirely off the income it generated. You treated me with contempt while depending completely on my financial support. That wasn't frustration poorly expressed. That was honesty about how little you valued me. I'm not coming home. I'm not restoring financial support. I'm not rebuilding relationships with people who demonstrated they don't respect me or appreciate my contributions. You wanted me to be useless? I'm being useless to you while being extremely useful to clients who actually value my work. The money I was spending to support your lifestyle is now invested in my own life. Better housing, retirement savings, professional development, and experiences I postponed while funding people who called me useless. You're facing foreclosure not because I abandoned you, but because you never had the financial foundation you pretended to have. I was that foundation. And now you're learning what happens when it's removed. Don't contact me again. Build your own lives without expecting me to fund them while accepting your criticism. Figure out how to support yourselves the way I've been supporting myself since I started freelancing. And maybe think about the irony of calling someone useless while they're literally keeping you housed and fed." I sent the email and then set up permanent filters that would automatically delete any future messages from my family without my seeing them. The communication was final and complete, establishing boundaries that I had no intention of ever softening or reconsidering. 6 months after leaving my family, I attended a professional design conference where I was invited to speak on a panel about building successful freelance businesses. The invitation had come from my professional reputation and the portfolio of high-profile clients I had built over 6 years of freelance work, the same work my family had dismissed as inadequate and unstable. One of the challenges freelancers face is lack of validation from people who don't understand non-traditional career paths, I told the audience during the panel discussion. Family members, particularly from older generations, may see freelance work as risky or illegitimate compared to traditional employment. Learning to value your own work independently of their opinions is crucial for freelance success. The comment resonated with many audience members who approached me afterward to share their own experiences with family members who didn't understand or respect their freelance careers. "My parents still ask when I'm going to get a real job, even though I'm earning 6 figures from freelance consulting," one person told me. "They can't seem to grasp that freelance work can be just as stable and lucrative as traditional employment." The conversation reminded me that my family's attitudes about my career hadn't been unique. They were part of broader generational and cultural patterns about what constitutes legitimate work. But that understanding didn't make their treatment acceptable or require me to maintain relationships with people who devalued me. A year after leaving, I received notification through my Aunt Linda that my parents had lost their house to foreclosure and had moved into a small apartment they were renting with assistance from other family members. Tyler had apparently gotten a job at a retail store after realizing that nobody else would support him indefinitely. Brian and Patricia had both found part-time work after accepting that they weren't going to find positions matching their previous career levels. My family had learned to support themselves, but they had learned through loss and hardship rather than through choice or personal growth. Their financial collapse had been the consequence of calling the person who funded their lifestyle useless and then losing access to that funding. Linda called me despite my previous request not to be contacted about family matters. "I thought you should know that your parents are really struggling. They lost the house, and they're working low-wage jobs just to afford basic rent. Tyler is working retail after finally accepting that he needed to get employed. They all learned their lesson about taking you for granted. Learning lessons isn't the same as deserving restoration of what they lost," I replied. They didn't learn to value me. They learned that they needed my money. Those are very different realizations. Don't you think you've made your point? Linda asked. They apologized. They acknowledged they were wrong about you, and they're suffering real consequences. Isn't it time to forgive and help them recover? They're suffering consequences of their own financial irresponsibility that I was temporarily shielding them from, I said. I didn't create their financial crisis. I postponed it while they treated me like I was the problem. They called me useless while I kept them afloat. Now they're discovering what their lives look like without my useless contributions. I ended the call and blocked Linda's number as well, preventing any future attempts at family mediation or guilt-inducing updates about my parents' hardships. 2 years after leaving my family, I was thriving in ways that would have been impossible if I had remained connected to people who devalued me while depending on my support. My freelance business had grown to include a small team of contractors. My income had increased to over $180,000 annually, and I had built substantial savings and investments that provided genuine financial security. I had also developed relationships with friends and professional colleagues who appreciated my work and valued my presence in their lives. The contrast between these healthy relationships and my family dynamics was profound. Nobody in my current life made me feel inadequate or useless. Nobody took my contributions for granted. Nobody treated my success as something to criticize rather than celebrate. The final chapter in my family story came when Brian somehow obtained my work email address and sent a message that attempted to appeal to me as a mature adult who should be able to move past old conflicts. Addison, 2 years have passed since you left our family, and I think enough time has gone by for all of us to gain perspective on what happened. Your mother and I have learned a lot about financial management and personal responsibility during this difficult period. We understand now that we took your support for granted, and that we didn't appreciate how hard you were working to help us. I hope you can find it in your heart to reconnect with your family. We're not asking for financial support. We're managing on our own now with the jobs we've found. We just want to rebuild the family relationships that were damaged by misunderstandings and poor communication. Life is too short to maintain these divisions over things that were said in frustration years ago. The message attempted to reframe our entire conflict as misunderstandings and poor communication, rather than acknowledging fundamental disrespect and the entitlement they had felt to my income while dismissing my value. But I had moved beyond needing their acknowledgement or validation. I sent one final response to Brian's email. You called me useless while living off my income. That wasn't poor communication. That was honest expression of how little you valued me while you needed my money. I don't need your acknowledgement of mistakes or your desire to rebuild relationships. I needed respect when I was providing support, and you couldn't offer that. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm also not interested in reconnecting with people who taught me that I'm most valued for what I can provide financially rather than for who I am personally. Useless is very busy being useful to people who actually appreciate her work. I hope you continue managing on your own, because that's what you'll be doing permanently. I sent the message and then deleted Brian's contact information from my email, ensuring that no future messages from him could reach me. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who criticize your career while depending on your financial support, who call you useless while living off your income, who take your contributions for granted while treating you with contempt, please know that you don't owe them continued support regardless of family obligations. Being called useless by people who depend entirely on your income reveals delusion that can only be corrected by removing your support and letting them discover what actual uselessness looks like. Financial support should flow from respect and healthy relationships, not from obligation to people who don't value you. Sometimes the most powerful response to being called useless is proving your value by being useful somewhere else, to people who appreciate what you offer. Your income, your success, and your contributions deserve recognition and respect. If your family can't provide that, then other people will. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.